Thank you, Cantor David. And just gonna wait for things to dry for a moment. So in this week's Parsha, we meet 5 very unusual sisters. They're the daughters of Tzlafchad, and their father passed away. They have no brothers. He didn't leave a male heir, and now everyone is getting land. Everyone's getting their portion of land. And here are these sisters noticing they're not getting any portion of land because the laws of inheritance don't allow for a land inheritance to pass from a father to a daughter. It has to pass from a father to a son. And so they're standing there, and this just doesn't feel right to them. They turn to Moses, and they make their case. They say that this is not anything that is our fault. We should be inheriting, like all of Israel is inheriting. Our father in his lifetime, managed whatever he managed and was not perfect and, had an accounting of anything he did, so that's not on us. And there is no reason really why we shouldn't be inheriting. And they make their claim, and they make their statement based on justice, that something about this is not right, it's not equal, it's not just. And Moses takes their claim to God, and amazingly, God turns to Moses and says they're right. And actually, the laws of inheritance need to change, and it does change. And these daughters now do inherit land, and the laws of inheritance change forever. So these 5 sisters turn to state their case, and their case is accepted, and the law changes in Judaism and changes forever. And what the sages tell us when they're remarking on this is that these women could have made a legal argument. They had a very good legal argument to make. They didn't. They didn't go in there for the legal technicality. They went in there for the moral value. They went in there and said, something about this doesn't feel right. It's not just, it's not equal. And it's on that basis that they actually changed Judaism rather than the technical basis of it. And what then happens is the Kabbalists, Jewish mystics, look at it, and they're not going to engage in the discussion about what was that legal thing they could have done, what was that case that they presented. That's not where Jewish mysticism will sit. The Kabbalists look at it and say, what is it they wanted? What did they want to get? What does that mean when they come and they say, we wanted a portion of it? Exactly what does that mean when someone says, I want a portion of it? And the idea of looking at what we have in the world and understanding that it's not based on merit. We don't look at it and say, anyone who has great wealth deserves that wealth. And anyone who is challenged with poverty deserves to be challenged with poverty. We would never look at the world and say that material things apportion themselves according to merit, according to what the person deserves. So if it's not according to merit, then what is it? When those girls come and they say, we want our portion, the question then becomes, what is your portion? What does that mean, that you want your portion? And if it isn't by merit, then exactly how are we figuring this out? And what the Jewish mystics tell us is that we don't get things as rewards. We actually are given things that we are charged to work with. It's not that now we have a reward and we get to enjoy it. It's that now we are given something and we have to understand our responsibility because we've been given something. We've been charged to work with something. The portions that we have are the things that are given into our hands because we will understand how we then elevate those things. We create purpose for them. We improve the world with them. We use them for acts of human kindness. We use them for our enjoyment. And then we share that enjoyment with others. That is how we are to engage with the material world. So when we say we want our portion, we are talking about something material, but we are not talking about something that is there only for us. We are talking about the responsibility of the thing that is placed into us. When we talk about a portion of land, it's not a gift, it's a responsibility. It became an inheritance, and now we're able to look at that and understand, oh, what did we just say about an inheritance? Because now we are saying an inheritance is a responsibility, not a gift. When we inherit something, we have not been gifted with something, we have been charged with something. And that is how we look at the materialism around us. When the daughters talk about what they want as an inheritance, they mention their father, and they talk about his life, and they talk about what happened, because inheritances will always speak of its origins, and we will always maintain those connections, and that's part of the responsibility and part of being charged with it. These sisters don't make a legal argument because all of this goes far beyond the legality of it. It goes to the core of understanding how we're supposed to interact with the material world. In Judaism, we are not allowed to isolate ourselves from the world. We must engage with it. We commit ourselves to repair and to heal the world, and therefore we understand that if I am only in my life improving myself and not going beyond that, then nothing in the world will change. If the objects in my life are only there to bring me pleasure, then I am the master, and everything around me is lesser than I. And now the world has actually become my ego. Once I accept that the world must be more than just me, I start to understand fundamental questions. And this week, the Torah has raised one of those fundamental questions and said, what does it mean to ask for your portion? So I need to find a way to understand what my portion is. What is that thing in this world that is waiting for me, that is uniquely my physical, material thing? When I identify it, I link myself to it, and I recognize my responsibility of how I use it. When I receive an inheritance from the Torah's point of view, I have accepted the responsibility to understand how it uniquely expresses that person who began and how I maintain that ethic. According to our sages, every object in the world has its own journey to take. It has been placed in my hands for a brief time, only the amount of time that is needed for me to move it to the next step of its journey. The Talmud tells us that the rabbis recycled their goods and repurposed what they had when they no longer needed these things, so that these objects could move to the next part of their journey. There's a part in the Talmud I remember studying years ago, and it was a case that someone brought because they had injured themselves on a neighbor's fence, and they injured themselves on the broken glass that was in the neighbor's fence. And then it gets to court, and the neighbor is found not liable because, the court says, everyone expects broken glass in a fence. So the person should have been careful and should have been aware that could happen, and therefore that's not on the neighbor. And I'm studying it thinking, what? First of all, why is everybody expecting broken glass in someone's fence? Why is anybody putting broken glass in their fence? Exactly what's going on. And the case is speaking as if we all know that if I'm leaning on a fence, there's going to be broken glass in there. And it forces us back into that mindset, that understanding, that when something of utility breaks, I now have two choices. I can throw it away, I can bury it, I can get rid of it, and then its journey ends. Or I recognize that material things have a journey to take in the world, and they are placed in my hands so I can bring them to the next step of their journey. And this broken glass can sit in the earth doing nothing, or I can repurpose it to make a fence stronger, to make it actually act as the barrier I intend it to be, to keep everything inside that fence enclosed in that fence securely, to keep other things safe. The glass now moves into my fence, and it becomes the standard. So everyone is going to expect that there's going to be broken glass in fences, so don't lean on it without thinking, oh, there's a bit of a risk. But it's because their view of objects is very different than our view. In fact, there's another example of a rabbi who took his shoes after wearing them so thin that they couldn't work as shoes anymore. They were too full of holes, they were not doing anything. But before discarding them, he took them and he would wrap them in a rag and then place them outside in the rag. And of course the question becomes from his students, what are you doing? And he said, I'm honoring the shoes. The shoes protected my feet all those years. They kept me from cuts. They kept me from injury. I am not simply throwing them in the trash. I am honoring them. I am wrapping them in a rag. And then we look at it and placing it outside because they're not shoes anymore, but they are something, and someone else will be able to look at them and make them something new. But when we look at the totality of that, we understand the rag. The rag began as a garment. It evolved into a rag. I can throw it out, or I can use it to honor the shoes. It is the journey of the rag. They've both been placed in my hands, and it is my responsibility to move them both to the next step of what they can become. The rabbi is merely the guiding hands. The material things in our lives are not static things. They are opportunities that are introduced into our paths. When we think we deserve them, the world again starts to revolve around us in our thoughts, in our egos. But when we are not allowed to pull away from the materialism and only engage with our spiritual selves, when we understand that where we are sitting on now is actually a unique place. Although we're not allowed to pull away from the world, we've all spent a year more pulling inward. We've stayed in our homes. We've reduced our relationships and our exchanges with the world. We've minimized. And as our doors begin to open, it can become uncomfortable to go back. It actually can trigger anxiety to go back. It's easy to convince ourselves that if I lived without most of these things for over a year, I don't need most of these things. I could easily continue without most of those things. I'll stay where I am. I'll continue minimalistically. I don't want material things. If we find ourselves in a place where we have pulled away from the world, actually distancing ourselves from the things that are around us, the Torah reminds us of the daughters of Tzlafchad, and that we, like they, should seek a portion outside of ourselves that will allow for the world to move forward towards justice and equality, each of us in our own way, each of us with our own portion. Shabbat Shalom.